So we're going to get into to today's message. This is the third part of the series on the book of Proverbs. And this morning we're going to turn to Proverbs chapter 16. So if you're looking on the screen, there's a typo. It should say Proverbs 16, not chapter 6. And that typo is also on your sermon outline, which you should get out so you can make some notes as we're going through the service today. Because if you make a note, you'll remember it actually after you have dinner today, okay? So with that said, let's go into that scripture from Proverbs chapter 16, verses 2 and 3. It says this: "All the ways of people are pure in their eyes, but the Lord tests the motives. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will succeed." So, how many of you remember your first job? Your first job. Yeah, okay, good. Y'all have your hand up for your first job. What were some of your first jobs? Just somebody shout out. What was your first job? What? Paper boy, okay. Dishwasher, eh? A lifeguard, yes, all right. Babysitting, yeah, okay. Those are a lot of great first jobs. My first job, the first job that I ever got paid for was cutting the grass at Clasters. Clasters was literally catty-cornered from where I was growing up in Lewistown. So I went over there once a week during the summer, and I would cut the grass. Probably took me about 15 minutes to cut the grass, and when I was done, I'd go back to the office and somebody would hand me either $5 or $10. I don't know. To a kid at that time, I felt like I was rich, okay? I spent a summer. I worked at the local playground in Lewistown. I handed out recreational equipment and watched kids play for a morning or something like that. Then I got my dream job. My dream job was to be a shoe salesman at Glick Shoes. Now, the reason it was my dream job was that my dad, before he passed, he was the warehouse manager at Glick Shoes. And so I always wanted to work where my dad worked. And so I finally got a job as a shoe salesman at Glick's. I won't tell you how long I worked there, but was not for me. It was not only a place where my dad worked, it was actually a place where my mom worked as well. And so they met through Glick Shoes, and if it wouldn't been for Glick Shoes, I wouldn't be here today. So that's okay, you can laugh. In college, I was a custodian. I was a work-study custodian. During the first summer on the custodial crew, I met this cute little blonde girl that I asked out while we were sweeping stairwells. She actually said yes. I could go on and tell you more about my work history. This coming July, I'm going to begin my 36th year in ministry. And, hold on. And this August, that cute girl that I met at Messiah, we're going to be married for 40 years. Now that you can applaud for. All right. So I want you to think about this. Why do we work? Why do we work? Okay? The easy answer is we work because we get a paycheck, right? Okay? Why do we work? I really want you to think about that question because I want you to be able to walk out of here at the end of the day today and realize that the reason you work is not for a paycheck. Okay? Now, we know what we work for, and that is a paycheck. Or maybe it's the satisfaction of a job well done. I remember when I was a custodian at Messiah that our boss taught us to always stop and look back at what we had just cleaned and take great satisfaction in what we had done, because that was the best pay that we could get. So what we work for is a paycheck and satisfaction. How we work, maybe it's with our hands, maybe it's with our mind, maybe it's a mixture of those two things. But whether you work for a paycheck or are unpaid, whether you work at home or work in an office, whatever your work, why do you work? See, why is more important than what you work for or even how you do your work, because knowing your why, well, if you don't know why you work, my guess is you're probably not satisfied at work. You may go through the motions, you may accomplish the task that is before you, but you won't feel rewarded if you don't really understand the why in your work. So before we get to the how answer for today, how we wisely show up at work, let me offer you a glimpse at why we go to work. And if we want to know the answer to it, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning, to Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, where we read that God set the man in the garden, quote, to work it and take care of it. Okay? Work, and this applies to everything, okay? Whether you're getting a paycheck, whether you're retired, whether you're at home, whatever it is, everybody works, okay? Everybody works, okay? Work is a part of God's good, creative work. God created us, God purposed us to work, and you and I are formed to be creative and productive parts of God's work in creation. And that is ultimately why we work, because God created us to work. And if we are created in the image of God, if we really understand that, then we are most like God when we are at work, because that's what God does. Now, somewhere along the line, I got this misunderstanding about work. For some reason, I've started believing that work was a part of the curse that God had placed upon Adam and Eve after they sinned. Don't ask me where I got that. I don't think Ted would have taught me that, but I don't know where. But somewhere it got into my head, and my guess is that there are a lot of people in the world today who still have this same idea that work is a curse. That's why they think that work is a 4-letter word. Okay, thanks for laughing, Jay. I appreciate it. Somebody gets my jokes. Okay, but I suddenly realized one day, I don't know whether somebody said something or I realized it, I don't remember how it happened, but I suddenly realized that Genesis 2:15 comes before Genesis 3, which is the story of the fall, and I realized that work was part of God's blessing, not part of God's curse. And if you stop and think about that, that really does impact the way we think about work. I mean, if you think that work is a curse and not a blessing, it's going to change your whole perspective on why you work. So, do you see how knowing the why is imperative to our approach to work? Because when you see work as a blessing and not as a curse, we automatically come to work with a whole different attitude. So, I don't know when you're going back to work, although we're all going to work before the day is over. Does seeing work as a blessing change your attitude about work and how you work? Now, Paul, the Apostle Paul, was writing to some believers, some disciples of Jesus in the town of Colossae, and he was writing to them about their behavior and how their behavior influenced the rest of society around them. And I want you to think about this. We sort of brought this up last week, But what is your attitude about your work? What is the quality of your work saying to other people about you being a disciple of Jesus? Or to think about it in maybe a simpler way, do your work habits reflect positively on Jesus? Okay, think about this. Last week we said, how do your words reflect on Jesus? This week we can ask the same question, but insert the word work. How does your work reflect back on Jesus? Something that we need to think about in our daily approach to work. Now, when we said our vision statement earlier, we said that the last part of that says that we are inspiring people to become disciples of Jesus. Well, let me ask you to think about this. Does your attitude and do your actions at work inspire people to want to become a disciple of Jesus? Just think about that. Think about that. So here's what Paul wrote. Paul said this in Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, okay? Whatever you do. That sort of is all-encompassing, right, folks? Whatever you do. Okay? So whatever you do, work at it with what? All your heart, as working for the paycheck, as working for the applause of people, as working to get ahead. Is that any of that in there? No. What is it? As working for the Lord. Okay? Whatever your work is. Okay? Whatever your work is, you are working for the Lord rather than for people. Now, Paul is driving home that same essential point about our work, that we don't do it for the applause of people. Okay? We don't do it for a paycheck. And the satisfaction that we receive is when we recognize that we're working for the Lord. That impacts how we view, how we approach our work, and it should influence how we show up at work. Now, I said earlier, I've been doing ministry for the last 35 years, okay? And if during that time I was working for the applause of people, I was doing it for the wrong reason. If I was doing this job for the last 35 years and the only people I wanted to appeal to were the people who are sitting out here, I would have been doing what I do for the wrong reason. So I hate to break it to you today, but I don't work for you. I don't work for your applause. I don't work to make you happy. That might be a shock to some of you today. I work for Jesus, for his applause and his applause only. And for some people, that's a revolutionary thought, because they thought that I worked for them. I don't. I work for Jesus. I work for Jesus. And the day that I stop working for Jesus is the day that I stop working. So I want you to ask yourself, why do you show up at work? Why do you show up at work? Now, before we move on to the how, let me just share with you two quick things from a passage in the book of Exodus. In Exodus chapter 31, we get introduced to two guys who work, okay? We get introduced to two craftsmen in Exodus chapter 31. The one guy's name is Bezalel, and the other guy's name is Aholiab, and I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but it sounds good to me. They are set apart by God to build the tabernacle and all the things that go in it, okay? The tabernacle was the tent where the people of God, as they were moving through the desert from Egypt to the promised land, that's where they met God, in the tabernacle. And inside there were all sorts of things that helped them to meet with God. Listen to what God says to Moses. He says this about Bezalel, and then it also applies to Aholiab too, but he says this: I have filled Bezalel with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills. Now, before you move on from that passage, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to read, starting with I have, and I want you to fill your name in when we get to Bezalel, okay? So I want you to read that passage with me, and I want you to insert your name. If you're doing this at home, just say it out loud and don't worry about what everybody else thinks, okay? Here we go. I have filled George with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, with understanding, with knowledge, and with all kinds of skills. Now, I don't know about you, but that should change the mindset about your work and why you go to work and how you go to work. And the reason I believe that is because I don't think God just chooses a few people to put his Spirit upon and to give wisdom and understanding and knowledge and all kinds of skills. God does that for all of us. God does that for all of us because God has created all of us to purposefully do the work of helping people to understand that they are dwelling day in and day out in the very presence of God. Stop and think about this. Bezalel and Aholiab, they are set apart to build a place where people are going to come and they are going to be in the very presence of God and they are going to worship God. If you apply that passage to yourself, when you go to work on Monday, you will recognize that your workplace is a place where the Spirit of God already dwells, and you're helping people to recognize the glory of God in that place. That should change the way we go to work. That should change the way we go to work. I mean, I can't imagine that Bezalel and Aholiab went to work the day after, the day after Moses told them this. And we're just sort of like, oh, well, we'll see what happens today. They went to work with a passion because they knew that God had called them to the work that he had prepared them for. And you and I need to have that same kind of recognition that every day when we go to work, we are helping people to recognize the sacred environment where God's presence is dwelling at the place where we are working. Now, I told you there's two things about this chapter that I think are significant. The first is that God provides all of us a blessing to create a place where people can worship God. But here's the second thing. In the second part of chapter 31, God institutes the Sabbath. Okay? There's that big word Sabbath. Let me break some old mindset. Sabbath does not mean Sunday, okay? Sabbath means rest, okay? God said to Moses, 6 days I worked, okay? We're not getting into the technicalities of how long it took God to create. God said, I worked for 6 days, and on the seventh day I rested. Now, when God instituted the Sabbath, God says here in chapter 31, in verse 14, he says, anyone who desecrates the Sabbath is to be put to death. Now, there are some people that run around today and say that if you work on Sunday, well, you deserve to die for that because God set aside Sunday, and that's a holy day. Don't get hung up on that. But listen, God wants you to rest 24 hours straight. A day of rest. A day of worship. A day to reconnect with people. A day. Put this away. We need Sabbath. I don't have time to riff on this. That's what I have in my notes here. See what time there is to riff on this point. What did I tell you? The verse said, anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. Guess what? It's not that God is going to go, and smite us. It's what medical professionals and mental health professionals have been telling us for a long time. We need a day of rest. And it's not God who's going to kill us if we work 7 days straight. It's us that are going to kill ourselves. Okay, enough said. So, if you know the why, it should make the how pretty simple, okay? Let me just give you two things about how we show up at work. Listen, this is the easy part, okay? If we understand why, well, the how should come right along with it, okay? How we show up at work is, first of all, with integrity. Integrity is simply that ability to be consistent through and through, okay? It's like ivory soap, 99 and 9/10 pure. Is that what it said, right? The old folks that know about ivory soap, okay? Put another way, integrity is that I'm the same all the way through. What's on the inside is reflected on the outside. What's on the outside is what's on the inside. One of the things that should set us apart as disciples of Jesus is our integrity, that we are the same through and through. Listen to these two Proverbs. Proverbs 10:9 says this, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. And number 2, Proverbs 11, verse 3, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Now, both of these verses have at the core of them the idea of walking a straight path rather than walking a crooked path. Okay? Wisdom teaches us to walk with integrity. And there are two specific things when we think about our integrity, the integrity of our words and the integrity of our actions. Okay, Proverbs 12:22, this sort of harkens back to last week about our words. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in people who are trustworthy. We need to have integrity in our words, and this is about the integrity of our actions. He says in Proverbs 18:9, a lazy person is as bad as someone who destroys things. So when we set about thinking about how we work, we should always work with integrity. Integrity of our words and integrity of our actions. And the final part is that we need to show up to work diligently. You may wonder why I started talking about ants at the beginning of the service today. Well, it's very simple, because Proverbs talks about the image of the ant as a diligent worker and the sluggard as a lazy worker. Listen, one more time, Proverbs 6:6-8. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer, gathers its food at harvest, and can make its own lifeboat in a flood. I just added that last part in. But it's true. It's true. I read it on the internet, okay? Remember, I told you earlier, ants are smart. Ants are smart. And God gave us this wonderful creation to look at and to learn from. And what Proverbs is telling us is, look at the ant. The ant's pretty smart. And then it says this, the way of the sluggard is blocked with thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. That's from Proverbs 15:19. I think if you take any time to read through the Proverbs, you're going to see these two words, integrity and diligence, over and over and over again. Not just when it talks about ants and sluggards, but you'll read it throughout everything that you read. And that's really telling us how we show up at work. We need to be people of integrity, and we need to be people who work diligently. Now, let me wrap things up here this morning. I began in Proverbs chapter 16 this morning by saying that the passage says that we are to commit our work to the Lord. Literally, what it reminds us here is that we are to orient our life around Jesus. We are to orient our life around Jesus. We are great at compartmentalizing. Some of you are really good compartmentalizers. If I went to your house today, there would be a shelf and a box on every shelf that has all the things in it. Okay? Some of you are really good at compartmentalizing, but not just at home. Some of you are good at compartmentalizing in life. You have your faith here, you have your work here, you have your relationships here, you have this and this and this, and we like to compartmentalize things. Folks, let me tell you something. Jesus doesn't like to be put on a box that we put up on a shelf and take down on Sunday. Jesus doesn't want to be compartmentalized. Jesus wants to be the axis around which everything in our life revolves. Jesus doesn't just want to be involved with your life on a Sunday morning. Jesus wants to be a part of the rhythm of your everyday life. So that means that his words are going to impact the why and the how of your work. His words, his wisdom are going to teach us how to do our work, how to navigate relationships at work, and how to honor the people that we work with. Now, the Proverbs, they are principles that have been tested over time, and they have been summarized to help us navigate through life wisely. I told you this when we started this series. I'm going to do my part to dig and find the wisdom, or to find the wisdom. I'm going to give you the knowledge. I'm going to give you the information. But it doesn't become wisdom until you take it home and do something with it. So I've done my part. Now it's time for you to do yours. Join me in a word of prayer.